In June stood by a concrete column with a piece of rebar in his hands and watched as the creature moved through the crowd of people toward him, not hurrying, confidently, like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. He managed to think only one thing: I should not have gone to the subway. Then the blow. Then nothing. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was white, ordinary, slightly peeling, with a long crack above the right corner, the very one he had seen every morning for the last 2 years. Above him was a square light fixture with a Korean character on the shade, which he had brought from Busan. Outside the window was a gray Seoul dawn and the hum of morning Manhattan Road below. He was lying in his apartment, in the Mapogu district, 14th floor, a studio apartment, with a view of the Han River if you stood by the left window. No, in June Cha in June, 29 years old. Structural engineer. Seoul. He touched the wall, got up, went to the window. Below was ordinary morning life. Pedestrians in masks. A taxi at the traffic light. A DeKalb Street vendor by the bus stop. Pigeons on the ledge of the shopping center. He took the phone from the nightstand. Date: August 14th. The apocalypse began on November 12th. 3 months. Exactly 90 days. In June sat down on the bed and stared at the floor for a long time without moving. Then he got up, took a notebook and a physical pen from the desk drawer, not a phone, because some things need to be written by hand, and began. For the first 3 hours, he simply remembered. Methodically, without panic. Panic came later. In the first life it gave nothing. Now only a system was needed. On November 12th, at about 6:47 a.m. Seoul time, the sun would begin to fade. At first it would look like dense fog, then like smog, the kind that happens on especially bad days in Seoul. Then worse. By noon of the first day, people would think it was an abnormal weather phenomenon. By the evening of the second day, that it was a regional-scale disaster. By the morning of the third, that it was the end, because there would be no sun at all. The sky would remain gray, not black, not night-like, but specifically gray, dead, like an old screen with no signal. Where the weak, diffused light that allowed people to see during the day came from, no one ever understood in the first life. But it was enough to see, and not enough to live normally. Animals reacted faster than people. On the second day, dogs. Not all of them, but enough. Something in the absence of sunlight broke their orientation. Pets threw themselves at their owners. Strays gathered into aggressive packs. On the 5th day, rats rose from the sewers in a wave. On the 10th, something began that people at first took for rumors. Wild boars in Bukhansan National Park began attacking people without provocation. Then stories appeared about something larger in the forests near Wajongbu. After 3 or 4 weeks, real mutants appeared. In June did not know how it worked biologically. He saw the result. Larger, faster, more aggressive than the original. With altered body proportions, with behavior in which there was neither fear nor fatigue. And finally, those that came in the subway. From below, everyone went to the subway. The logic was clear. The Seoul subway is one of the best in the world. Deep, extensive, concrete. It was warm there. There was water. There was space. Thousands of people went underground in the first days. The first weeks were indeed tolerable. Then they came from below. In June again saw the steel door that something had torn straight through. He slammed the notebook shut. Wrote the last phrase in large letters on a separate sheet. Not the subway. Never. The first practical problem was simple and cruel at the same time. Cha in June, 29 years old, a structural engineer at a mid-sized construction company in Seoul, earned decently by the standards of his level, about 3 million won a month. He rented an apartment in Mapogu, saved little by little, and lived without debts. There were about 18 million won in his account. At the current exchange rate, roughly $14,000. For building a serious shelter, this was catastrophically insufficient. He sat at the desk and looked at the numbers. Then he remembered something. In the previous life, at the end of September, about 6 weeks before the apocalypse, there had been a sharp short-term jump in several South Korean stocks. The shares of companies that supplied generators and autonomous energy systems rose almost fourfold in 3 weeks against the background of some government tenders, and then fell again. Ordinary investors did not have time to enter and exit. Institutional investors did. In June would have time too. He spent 2 days studying, 1 more day opening a brokerage account. He invested everything. It was frightening. It was the only option. 5 weeks later, he exited the position. There were 112 million won in the account. He sat and looked at the screen for a long minute, then exhaled, then wrote the next point of the plan. Money without a place is nothing. The place was the most difficult part because it required balancing a dozen factors at once. In June spent almost a week searching. Requirements, not the city. Cities turned into traps. Too many people, too few resources, too complicated security logistics. Not too far. A maximum of 70 kilometers from Seoul. Before the start of the apocalypse, he had to be able to go there regularly and work. After the beginning, the roads would come to a standstill in the first days, then they would be covered with snow. Water, a private source, independent of the city network. Structure, at least something solid had to already be standing. Building from scratch in 3 months was impossible. Isolation, not by a highway, not by popular roads. A place where random people would not come just like that. He looked at maps of Gyeonggi-do province and found it. An abandoned industrial complex in the area of Yangpyeong-gun County, 54 kilometers from Seoul, between two low mountain ranges, with the Namhan River 1.5 kilometers away and a small stream directly on the territory. They had once made building blocks there. Then it closed. Then the property was resold several times and eventually forgotten. 3 production buildings of reinforced concrete, a partially underground technical level, thick industrial walls, not residential ones, 1 dirt road for entry. And all of this was being sold for ridiculous money, because who needed an abandoned factory 54 kilometers from Seoul? In June did. He called the agency the next morning. The real estate agent, an elderly man named Park Chan-soo, who had apparently been unsuccessfully trying to sell this property for years, looked at the young buyer with unconcealed amazement. They stood in the middle of the main production hall. 7-meter ceiling, half-meter reinforced concrete walls, several broken windows under the roof, overgrown with moss, rusty metal structures, the smell of dampness and old oil. You understand that no one has been here for about 10 years? Park Chan-soo said, looking around. I understand, and June answered. There is no electricity. We will connect a generator. Water supply. There is a well. I checked the documents. Depth 42 meters. The pump needs to be replaced. That is not difficult. The agent was silent for a moment. Young man, are you a builder? Structural engineer. I see. He looked at the walls again. And what are you planning here? And June slowly looked around the room. He did not see ruins. He saw Building A, the main living space. Building B, warehouses and a forge. Technical level, bunker, yard, vegetable garden, and tanks. To live, he answered. Park Chan-soo looked at him for another second. I see, he said in the voice of a person who understood nothing but stopped asking. The documents were signed 4 days later. Before starting work, In June sat down and made a strict week-by-week plan. Not approximate, exact, because 3 months sounds like a long time, but in practice 90 days, taking into account work, transportation, unforeseen delays and a solo pace, is almost nothing. August 17th days left week 1 to 2. Assessment, clearing, basic infrastructure. Well, temporary electricity, first delivery of tools. September 30th days week 1 to 2. Technical zone. Reinforcement of the underground bunker level. Week 3 to 4. Building A, living space. Insulation, ceiling, ventilation. October 31st days week 1 to 2. Building B, warehouses. Storage system. Week 3, perimeter. Fencing, entrance nodes. Week 4, final purchases, delivery of supplies. Final preparation. Check of all systems. His own placement. He looked at the plan for several minutes, then wrote at the bottom, I cannot manage alone. That was also the truth that had to be accepted immediately. He arrived the next day after signing the documents. Early in the morning, in his old Hyundai Sonata, with 2 large bags of tools, a headlamp, a thermos of coffee, and a notebook. He entered through the main gates, heavy, rusted, opening with a creak that was probably heard in the neighboring village, and for the first 2 hours he simply walked and looked. Took notes. Building A, main production hall, 40 by 20 meters. Walls in good condition, reinforced concrete, thickness about 40 centimeters. The roof is partially damaged in the northwest corner. Concrete floor, level. 3 rows of high windows. All need to be closed and reinforced. Building B, smaller storage building, 20 by 15. Walls good. Roof intact. Ideal for storage. Technical level, stairs down from Building A, 3 flights, leading into an underground technical room about 15 by 10 meters. Ceiling 2 meters 10. There is dampness, but not critical. This will be the bunker. The yard is about half a hectare, surrounded by an old concrete fence about 2 meters high. Several places where the fence has crumbled. The stream enters the territory from the north side. The well is by the western wall. The pump is dead, but the well itself is intact. There is water. He checked by lowering a long rope with a weight. In June wrote everything down. Then he took photographs of every corner. Then he sat on a concrete block in the middle of the yard, drank coffee, and allowed himself once to think about how insane it all looked from the outside. One man, an abandoned factory, 3 months, apocalypse. Then he closed that thought and opened the notebook. Task for today: clear the main entrance and install a temporary generator. The first practical victories came quickly, and that was important psychologically. The well pump was replaced in 2 days. He found a craftsman through an app on his phone, a man of about 45 named Kim Kol-soo, who came, looked at the property with professional indifference, and did everything without unnecessary questions. When water came from the hose, cold, slightly rusty at first, but real, in June caught himself smiling. Water. There's water. That was the first. He installed the generator himself, a diesel one, 24 kilowatts, bought from an industrial supplier in Ikea. Heavy, loud, but reliable. He already knew that later he would need to add solar panels, not for beauty, but to save fuel. The generator was a reserve source, not the main one. When temporary work lamps lit up in Building A, for LED floodlights on tripods, the space immediately changed. From abandoned ruins, it turned into a work site. The first delivery of materials happened at the end of the second week. In June, rented a small truck and made 4 trips from the construction store in Ikea. Tools: rotary hammer, angle grinder, welding machine, hand tools. All professional, not amateur. Basic materials: cement, rebar, mounting foam, sealant, rolls of reinforced film. Lighting: 2 kilometers of cable, outlet blocks, spare lamps. He unloaded every trip himself. By the end of the week, his muscles hurt so much that he simply lay on a folding mattress in Building B and did not move. But in the notebook, there were check marks next to the first points. And that was more important than fatigue. He needed people. This was the most delicate problem. Telling the truth was not an option. To invent a convincing lie, it had to be something close to the truth so he would not get confused. He came up with a cover story, preparing for an extreme situation, natural disasters, political instability. Wants to build an autonomous facility for long-term independent living. Officially, a personal project. It sounded strange, but not insane. In Korea, the prepping movement was small, but it existed. First, he called his old friend Lee Han-bit, 27 years old, a welder and installer with 3 years of experience. They had studied together at a technical college, then went in different directions. Lee Han-bit worked on construction sites by contract, earned irregularly, and, according to the latest news from shared chats, was just looking for a proper project. In June, called him in the evening. Han-bit, I have work. Long-term, good pay, a real site, an interesting task. What kind of site? An autonomous residential complex outside the city. I will explain on site. Will you come take a look? Pause. When? Tomorrow. Lee Han-bit arrived the next day in an old Kia Morning with a thermos and a skeptical face. He walked around the entire property without saying a word, then stopped by the technical hatch. You want to turn this into a residential bunker? Yes. Why? In June looked at him directly. Because the world is unstable, and I want to have a place where any crisis can be survived. Han-bit was silent for a moment. You are crazy. Possibly. This will take months. 3. Do you have money for materials? Yes. And will you pay me properly? Above market. A long pause. Then Lee Han-bit nodded. Fine, but I will live on the site. Going back and forth every day is too long. Building B is yours, In June answered. And he had his first person. September 1st to 15th, the technical level was ideal in terms of location, but required serious work. In June had taken the first measurements there back in August. Now, together with Han-bit, they began the real transformation. Day 1. Waterproofing. The walls of the underground level had traces of moisture. Not critical, there were no real leaks, but this could not be ignored. During long-term living and falling temperatures, Dampness killed quickly. Metal rusts, supplies spoil, mold develops, immunity drops. They applied penetrating waterproofing to all the walls and the floor. In June worked with the mortar, Han bit with the sprayer. 3 layers, with each one drying. You know that structural engineers usually do not do this with their own hands, Han bit said on the second day. This one does, In June answered. Why? Because I want to know every centimeter of this place personally. Han bit looked at him, nodded, and continued working. This was the most important structural work. The standard underground ceiling could bear the load, but In June knew, or thought he knew, that under certain external impacts an extra margin of strength was needed. They added steel I-beams across the main spans, connecting them to the existing reinforcement through anchors. Han bit welded. In June held, measured, and supervised. The work took 5 days. After the final inspection, Han bit knocked on the beam. This is no longer just a basement. Exactly. What are you waiting for? In June looked at the beams, at the reinforced walls, at the future space. Safety. This was the most technically difficult moment of the first month. An underground level without ventilation is death. Slow, from carbon dioxide and humidity, but death. On the other hand, standard supply ventilation creates a direct channel to the outside, which in apocalypse conditions was unacceptable. Outside is cold. Outside may be contaminated air or simply monsters that will find the entrance. In June designed a 2-stage system. The first stage was the main air intake, hidden in a false ventilation pipe on the roof of Building A. From the outside, it looks like part of old industrial equipment. Inside, carbon and HEPA filters. The second stage was a manual damper at bunker level. In case of danger, it closes in 3 seconds and completely isolates the room from outside air. The air supply with the damper closed is about 6 hours for 4 people. Han bit installed the pipes. In June calculated the pressure and mounted the dampers. 6 hours, Han bit repeated when In June explained the parameters. And if the air outside is bad for longer, then we will solve that problem separately. How? Oxygen concentrators. 2 units. They are coming in the next delivery. Han bit fell silent, then quietly asked, In June, are you really preparing for the end of the world? A long pause. For a crisis, In June answered. Han bit looked at him for another second. Good, he said evenly. Then 3 oxygen concentrators would be better. Another person was needed. Specifically, someone with medical knowledge. In June remembered the first life well. Injuries, frostbite, infections. Without a medic, even a good shelter turned into a trap. He found her through a former classmate. Young So Young, 26 years old, an emergency nurse at North Seoul Hospital. She worked shifts, got tired, earned little. In June found her number through a mutual acquaintance and called in the evening. The conversation was short. So Young, my name is Cha In June. We do not know each other personally, but we have a mutual friend, Kim Tae-yong. I remember him, she answered cautiously. I am building an autonomous facility outside the city. Long-term living, full autonomy. I need a person with medical knowledge. Tae-yong said you are the best specialist among those he knows. Silence. That sounds strange. I agree, but the offer is serious. A separate room, good pay, a full medical block at your discretion. Come, take a look. If you do not like it, I will pay for the road and everything. A long pause. When? This coming weekend. She came on Saturday. Unlike Han bit, So Young did not walk around the property with professional indifference. She walked slowly, looked carefully, asked specific questions. Is there ventilation? 2-stage. Filters plus a manual damper. Water? A 42-meter well. Sewage? Composting toilet plus septic tank. We are installing it next week. Heat? A diesel boiler, a reserve wood-burning stove. She looked at him. You are seriously preparing? Yes. Why? In June answered the same way as he had to Han bit. About instability, about a crisis, about personal choice. So Young listened without interrupting. Then she said, I need to think for 3 days. Good. 3 days later she called back. I need a place for the medical block, no less than 20 square meters. Separate ventilation. An uninterruptible power source. And I make the list of medicines and equipment myself. Agreed. Then I move in next week. In June hung up and made a note in the notebook. Team, 3 people. Then he thought. And wrote below, need 2 more. September 15th to 30th while Han bit was finishing the bunker, In June took on Building A. The main problem of a large industrial building as a living space is heat. 7-meter ceilings and large volumes of air are beautiful in a picture, but death in winter. Heating such a volume is impossible with reasonable fuel costs. The solution was engineering-based and simple. Divide the space vertically. At a height of 2 meters 70 centimeters, in June and Hanbit built horizontal floors from a metal frame and OSB sheets, creating a second level inside Building A. The lower floor is the living area. The upper one is technical and storage. The volume of air for heating immediately decreased by 2.5 times. The lower level was divided into sections. Room 1, common space. A table, seating places, a place for eating. The center of life. Rooms 2, 3, 4, personal spaces. Small, but with proper doors and the right to privacy. In June knew from the first life that when people live in a group under pressure, personal space is not a luxury. It is a necessity for preserving the psyche. Room 5, So Young's medical block. Room 6, workroom. Tools, diagrams, planning. Insulation was done in 3 layers. First basalt wool between the frame studs. Then vapor barrier film. Then the final OSB sheathing. Hanbit worked quickly and with quality. So Young, who had moved to the site in mid-September, unexpectedly began helping not with construction, but with organization. She made lists, checked what was done and what was not, asked questions about the ventilation of each separate room. Without normal air exchange in personal rooms, people will start getting sick, she explained. I know, Injun answered. Then why was it not done right away? We are doing it now. Now is late. Not late. Another month and a half. So Young looked at him with the expression of a person used to working under a shortage of time. Then faster. And they worked faster. September 20th, the windows of Building A were one of the weakest places. Industrial glass blocks at a height of 4 meters would have been normal in ordinary life. But in an apocalypse, any transparent opening in a wall is a potential entry point and heat loss. In June solved the problem in 2 stages. First, close all windows from the outside with corrugated metal sheets set on anchors into the concrete wall. Not tightly, but with an air gap. This is an additional thermal insulation layer. Second, from the inside, fill the openings with foam blocks while leaving small ventilation gaps under the ceiling covered with mesh. The light inside would come from artificial lighting. It is psychologically hard to live without windows. Injun knew this and added a separate point to the plan: light therapy lamps imitating the daylight cycle. Bright white light in the morning, warm yellow in the evening. It is expensive, but necessary. People without a light routine break quickly. When So Young saw this point in the plan, she looked at him with a new expression. You think about psychology. I have to. Most people do not. Most people do not build shelters. Pause. In June, she said, can you tell me the truth? Why all this? He looked at her. A long second. I think something very bad will happen soon. What exactly, I cannot explain. But I know that I want to be ready. So Young looked at him seriously. How bad? Very. She nodded slowly. Then add anti-shock drugs to the list. A double supply. She did not ask anymore. October 1st to 5th, Park Yu-sun appeared on his own. He was Han Bit's cousin, 32 years old, a former soldier who had served his mandatory service and then another 2 years under contract. After the army, he worked as a security guard, then as a survival instructor in a tourist club. Han Bit mentioned him as if in passing, but Injun caught on immediately. Call him. Why? He is strange. In what sense? In the sense that he always says civilization will not last long. He buys canned food by the crate. Keeps an emergency go bag by the door. Injun looked at Hanbit. Call him tomorrow. Park Yu-sun arrived the next day. Tall, solid, with very calm eyes of a person who knows how to wait. He walked around the site, not like a builder and not like a buyer, but like a soldier assessing a defensive perimeter. He stopped by the fence. The outer barrier is weak, he said without greeting. I know, Injun answered. Next stage. Cameras? Planned. How many entry points? 3 now. After the work, 1 main, 1 emergency. Yu-sun turned to him. You are not just a prepper. Why? A prepper thinks about supplies. You think about defense. Pause. There is a difference. Injun looked at him. Will you help make the defense properly? Yu-sun looked back at the site. Yes, but I have a condition. What? I will bring 1 more person. My friend. His name is Oh Sun Ho, an agronomist. He worked on a countryside farm. If you're going to live here for a long time, you need a person who knows how to grow food. June did not hesitate. Call him. Sun-ho arrived 2 days later together with Yusun. Short, thin, wearing glasses with a cracked frame, with an eternally thoughtful face and a habit of looking not at people, but at the ground under his feet. He walked around the yard slowly, then knelt by the stream and touched the soil. The soil is average, he said, but with compost and fertilizing, it can work. The stream is good. We need a vegetable garden inside the perimeter, June said. Closed, preferably with the ability to work in winter. Sun-ho raised his head. A greenhouse. Yes, but not an ordinary one. One that works without sun. A long pause. Without sun? Yes. Sun-ho looked at him with the first real interest in the whole conversation. Hydroponics with special lighting, he said slowly. That is expensive. There is money. And complicated to install. There is a specialist. Sun-ho looked at the ground again. Fine, he said. Then I need a separate block. Minimum 30 square meters. And a list of equipment at my discretion. Agreed. The team was now 5 people. In June, Han Bit, So Young, Yusun, Sun-ho. Each had his own role. Each had his own reason to be here. No one knew the truth. But each of them felt in their own way, on their own level, that this place was important. And for now, that was enough. October 5th to 15th, Yusun took on the perimeter like a military task. And it was exactly what had been missing. Before his appearance, June thought of the barrier as a construction task. Reinforce, raise, close. Yusun immediately reformulated it. The barrier is not to keep things outside. It is to give time. Explain. Any fence can be overcome. The task of a fence is to slow down. Give us 30 seconds, a minute. During that time we react. June looked at him. You think like in the army. I think like a person who knows that at a defensive line the main thing is not the wall, but reaction time. This changed the approach. They designed the perimeter in 3 levels. The first level, external. The old concrete fence was raised from 2 meters to 3.5 by adding a metal structure with sharpened rods. Outside, at the base of the fence, a ditch, shallow, but sufficient to slow the movement of large animals. Han Bit welded all the fastenings in 4 days. The second level, signal. Yusun suggested a simple system. Thin fishing line on driven stakes outside the fence at a distance of 5 meters. Cans with small metal balls inside were attached to the line. Silent alarm? So Young asked with irony. Night alarm, Yusun answered seriously. If something large moves along the perimeter, it will catch the line. The cans will make noise. We will have time to get up. And if there is wind? The line is stretched at a height of 30 centimeters above the ground. The wind does not touch it. An animal or a person taller than 40 centimeters will touch it. So Young looked at him with respect. Simple and effective. The best solutions are always like that. The third level, cameras. 8 cameras around the perimeter, for in the inner yard. They record to a local server, powered by a separate battery block. A monitor in the workroom. June installed them himself, because he wanted to know every viewing angle. When the system started working, and he saw the entire perimeter on the screen for the first time, 8 clear images from the site at once, something clicked inside him. This was no longer a factory. This was a shelter. October 10th to 20th, the underground level was finished in mid-October. June conducted the final inspection alone early in the morning, while the others were still asleep. He went down 3 flights of stairs, turned on the lighting. The bunker looked like this. Entrance airlock, a small room before the main door. Armored door bought from the dismantling of an old bank vault in Incheon, found through an advertisement and delivered with enormous difficulty. Wall thickness 12 centimeters. Opens from inside and outside by code, but the mechanical bolt only from the inside. If the bolt is locked, nothing will enter from outside, Han Bit had said then, looking at the door. Exactly, June answered. Main room 15 by 10 meters, ceiling 2 meters 10. Divided into functional zones without walls, only by markings on the floor. Sleeping area, 6 sleeping places in 2 tiers. Compact, but with normal mattresses and curtains for privacy. Storage area, racks along the eastern wall from floor to ceiling. The main supplies will be here. Food area, table, 3 chairs, small electric stove, hood. Technical corner, control panel for all systems. Ventilation, power, camera monitoring, communication. Separate room 4 by 4 meters, behind an additional partition. Originally planned as a medical box, after the conversation with So Young, they decided, medicine on the upper level, here a psychological relief room. Just an empty quiet space. June stood in the middle of the bunker and looked at the result of 2 months of work. Then he sat down right on the floor, and for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to exhale. In the first life, he died in the subway. This was not the subway. This was his. Built with his own hands. Calculated with his own head. October 15th to 31st October became the month of purchases. June made the supply list not at random, but from memory of the first life and according to calculations. 5 people. Minimum survival period 12 months. With a reserve and possible joining of new people, 18. The calculation was strict. Minimum survival ration, about 2,000 calories per person per day. For 5, 10,000 calories daily. For 18 months, more than 5 million calories. That is a lot. That is very much. But he had Sun Ho's greenhouse, which by November should cover part of the need for fresh produce. The basis consisted of cereals and grains, rice, buckwheat, oatmeal, pearl barley. He bought them in 25 kilogram sacks from wholesale suppliers, explaining it as preparation for opening a cafeteria. Total more than 800 kilograms. Legumes, lentils, beans, soy. High protein, long storage. 200 kilograms. Canned goods, canned stew, canned fish, vegetables. He bought not in one store, but in 10 different ones so as not to raise questions. About 4,000 cans. Vegetable oil, 200 liters, in sealed canisters. Salt, sugar, spices, not only as food, but also as means of exchange and preservation. 50 kilograms each of the main items. Powdered milk, egg powder as sources of protein. A large supply of vitamins. So Young made the list herself. Sun Ho watched the deliveries with growing concern. How many people is this for? For 5. For how long? For a year and a half. Pause. You think we will spend a year and a half here? June looked at him. I think it is better to have extra than not enough. Sun Ho looked at the racks. Fine, he said quietly. Then I need to speed up the greenhouse installation. The well provided water. But the well could fail. June installed 3 tanks of 5,000 liters each on the upper technical level of Building A. A water supply in case of well failure, about 45 days with reasonable use. Additionally, 2 large rainwater filters. A water collection system on the roof with pipes leading to storage tanks. So Young added disinfection droppers. This was the most voluminous logistically. The diesel generator devoured a lot. The boiler too. June ordered an underground tank for 10,000 liters, which Han bit and Yu Sun installed in the western part of the yard, buried it, connected it with a pipe to the boiler room. Plus firewood. 5 cubic meters of ready split firewood under a canopy, and an additional reserve of logs. Yu Sun looked at the woodpile, and for the first time in all this time nodded with approval. Correct. Firewood is the last resource when everything else runs out. So Young received full carte blanche for the medical block. She spent 3 days making the list and 3 weeks on purchases, visiting dozens of pharmacies and medical suppliers. Broad-spectrum antibiotics, a serious supply. Painkillers, ibuprofen, paracetamol, tramadol. Dressing materials, several boxes. Basic surgical kit. Anti-shock. Vitamins. Insulin in case someone who joined later turned out to be diabetic. Antidepressants. So Young added them herself, without explanation. When all of this took up a separate room in Building A, Hanbit stopped in the doorway and was silent for a long time. This is more than in some hospitals, he finally said. Less than needed, So Young answered. October 10th to 30th, Sun Ho worked differently than the others. If Hanbit built quickly and noisily, Yu Sun methodically and silently, So Young organized and precisely. Then Sun Ho worked slowly and correctly. He did not hurry, but each of his actions was measured. The greenhouse was placed in a separate wing of Building B, an extension 20 by 8 meters, built in 3 weeks from a metal frame and polycarbonate panels. A hydroponic system on 3 levels of racks. First level, leafy crops, spinach, lettuce, cilantro, green onions. Fast growth, high nutritional value. Second level, tomatoes and cucumbers on vertical hangers. Third, potatoes and radishes in separate containers with substrate. Lighting, special LED grow lamps imitating the solar spectrum. Specifically for plants, not for people. Mode, 16 hours light, 8. Darkness. Will it grow without sun? In June asked. Plants grow from light, Sun Ho answered. Not specifically from the sun. The right spectrum, and the process will go. Enough for 5? Sun Ho shook his head. Enough greens, vitamins, fiber. But as the main source of calories, no? This is an addition to supplies, not a replacement. I understand. By spring, if we add area, we can reach 30 to 40% of the need for fresh food. That is already serious. In June looked at him. We will add it by spring. Sun Ho nodded and returned to his plants. October 28th, it happened in the evening. They were sitting 4 of them at the table in Building A. In June, Han bit. So young, you son. Sun Ho was in the greenhouse, as usual in the evening. Hanbit looked at In June for a long time, then said, In June, tell the truth. Silence. We have been building this for 2.5 months already. I have seen many construction sites, but no one builds like this who simply wants to be ready for a crisis. You know something specific. In June was silent. So Young looked at him. I want to know too. Yu Sun simply looked calmly, like a person who had long suspected, but was waiting for the moment. In June looked at his 3 people. People who had spent 2.5 months with him, working without rest. Who had moved here, leaving their familiar life behind. Who trusted him. Then he said, Close the door. Hanbit got up and closed it. In June placed the notebook on the table. What I am going to say sounds insane. I ask you to listen completely, to the end, and only then speak. Pause. On November 12th, in 2 weeks, the sun will begin to fade. This is not a natural phenomenon, not a disaster. This is the beginning of the end of normal life. The sky will be covered. The light will disappear. The temperature will fall. Animals will begin to change. Chaos will begin. Silence. How do you know? So Young asked quietly. Because it has already happened. To me. I died in the subway at Sadong Station a few weeks after it began. Then I woke up here, in August, with the memory of what happened. A long silence. Hanbit looked at the table. So Young at her hands. Yu Sun at In June, without blinking. Then Yu Sun asked, What exactly came in the subway? Mutants. Large. Fast. They came from below and killed everyone. What did they look like? Like nightmares that were given physical bodies. Pause. You could have gone somewhere else, Hanbit said without accusation. Not taken us. I could. Why did you take us? In June looked at him. Because alone I could build only walls. With you, I built a place where people can live. Long silence. Then So Young stood up, poured herself water, drank slowly. Good, she said evenly. Then I have a question. What? You died in the subway. That means it was bad there. Here you made it better. But how much better? In June looked at her. I do not know. I am changing everything I can. But what will come, I saw only in the subway. What will happen outside is another story. So Young nodded. Then we need 2 more weeks. Tomorrow we will make the final list of what is missing. In June looked at her, then at the others. Hanbit slowly nodded. Yu Sun said, I believe you. Not because it is logical, but because only those who know build like this. Sun Ho, who had quietly entered the room 5 minutes ago and was standing by the door, said softly, I need more seeds. And at that moment In June understood that he had a team. Not just people. A team. The final days before the apocalypse were the most intense. The team worked like a single mechanism now, without questions, without explanations. Everyone knew. Everyone understood. And this paradoxically made the work easier. Yu Sun doubled the signal system, added a second line of fishing line, placed homemade battery-powered sirens at the corners of the perimeter. So Young gave basic medical training to everyone. How to apply a tourniquet. How to stitch a wound. How to inject adrenaline. No one complained, not even Hanbit, who usually turned away at the sight of needles. Sun Ho seeded all tiers of the greenhouse and started the lighting on a full cycle. Hanbit checked every weld, every connection, every beam methodically, as if he knew this was the last chance. In June made the final lists, checked the cameras, tested the armored door again and again. November 10th. In the evening they gathered in the common room. No one suggested it. They simply came one after another and sat down. Sun Ho brought the first harvest from the greenhouse, a small bowl of young spinach that had managed to grow in 3 weeks. So Young made it into a salad with sesame oil and soy sauce from the supplies. They ate in silence. Then Hanbit said, In June. Yes. If you are right. I am right. Then thank you. For taking us. In June looked at him. Then at So Young. At you Sun. At Sunho. You took me, he said quietly. Alone, I would have simply built walls. November 12th, 6:31 a.m. June was not asleep. He sat in the workroom in front of the camera screen and watched the perimeter. Outside it was quiet and dark, an ordinary early Korean November night. Cold around 0. The sky was clear. 6:40, dawn began normally. A gray-pink horizon, as usual in November. Then a little brighter. Then, stop. The light was not intensifying. The sky was brightening, but not as if someone was slowly removing the brightness. Not extinguishing it, specifically removing it, like a dimmer on a lamp. 6:47. He stood up and called, everyone up. Footsteps were immediately heard in the corridor. It seemed no one had really been sleeping. They went out into the yard together. The sky was gray. Not cloudy. Not overcast. Dead. Sunho raised his head upward and looked for a long time. There is no sun, he said quietly. No, June answered. So Young stood beside him and said nothing. Sun looked at the perimeter, then at the forest beyond the fence. Something in his gaze changed, became sharper. Hanbit exhaled white steam. So it is true. Yes. Pause. What now? June looked at his shelter. At the walls they had built for 3 months. At the light in the greenhouse, which was already glowing from inside, warm and alive against the dead sky. At the armored bunker door, which could be locked in 3 seconds. At the cameras looking in all directions. Then he looked at the people beside him. Now we live. The first 12 hours after the dimming turned out to be deceptively calm. This was exactly what June feared most. Outside, the world still looked almost normal, only gray, dull, deprived of its familiar brightness. The cameras showed the yard, the fence, the road, the edge of the forest. There was no panic nearby, no screams, no running people, no fires on the horizon. But the silence was wrong. So Young was the first to say aloud what everyone felt. The city is not answering. June had already been trying for 10 minutes to call Seoul, colleagues, an old friend, relatives. The cellular connection was unstable. The internet worked in jerks. News loaded with delays, and then stopped updating altogether. Chaos on the air. Fragments of messages. Fire alarms. An announcer who spoke too fast and was clearly trying not to panic. Reports about an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. Then recommendations to stay home. Then about the need to save electricity. Then everything began to fall apart. Sun looked at the screen and remained silent. This is already worse than just an accident, he finally said. Yes, June answered. Because he knew. In his first life, 12 hours after the beginning, many still believe that everything would soon be restored. It is exactly at this moment that people usually make fatal mistakes. By evening it became clear that animals felt what was happening earlier than people. The first to come were not mutants. Ordinary dogs came. 2 stray mutts by the fence, thin and dirty, which had sometimes appeared on the territory before in search of food, now behaved strangely. They did not bark. They did not run away. They simply stood by the fence and looked toward Building A. Their eyes were cloudy and glassy. I do not like them, Hanbit said quietly. June was already holding a rifle in his hands. He had bought it long before the crisis under the guise of hunting equipment and registered it according to all the rules. In the first life it had not been useful to him. Now it could save him. The mutts moved at the same time. Not toward the fence. Not toward the people. Toward the camera. What are they doing? So Young asked. And at that very second one dog jumped onto the mesh, sank its teeth into the camera wire, and tore it out. The screen on the monitor blinked. The second dog sat down, tilted its head, and made a low, almost human sound. Then both went into the darkness. June stood motionless. They are learning, he said quietly. Sun looked at him. Not the dogs. What? What happened to them? And he immediately added, that means we need to strengthen not only the walls. We need to protect observation. This was the first practical lesson of the new world. For the first 3 days after the dimming, they did not leave the perimeter at all. June introduced isolation mode. No one opens the gates without his personal permission. No one approaches the outer fence closer than 3 meters at night. All windows are covered with curtains, even during the day. The yard light only when necessary. Energy under control. The greenhouse worked in limited mode. Sunho insisted, the plants need a light cycle. If we start saving too much, they will stop. How much can we leave? June asked. 16 hours, as planned. That is the minimum mode for growth. Then that is how it will be. So Young took up the medical block and made a new list: stress, insomnia, anxiety, sleep deprivation. She was not joking, but she was not dramatizing either. The psyche is the same resource as water or fuel, she said. If it is not maintained, all other systems are useless. June agreed, and added to the schedule a daily common time without work, 1 hour in the evening, when they simply sat, ate, and talked. Hanbit was indignant at first. It is the end of the world, and you are introducing quiet hours? Exactly because of that, June answered. At the end of the world, people break not from monsters, but from overload. Yu-sun smiled for the first time. That is right. On the 4th day, they heard people. Not nearby, far away. At first they were just faint sounds, almost like wind. Then the screams became clearer. So Young stood by the camera screen and sharply turned around. Do you hear that? June had already climbed to the upper observation post. From there, across the gray field and the forest edge, the sound barely reached them, but it was distinguishable. Human voices, torn, frightened, and then something like a blow against metal. Yu-sun looked through binoculars. On the road to the south, a car has stopped. People are running. How many? 4. No, 5. June saw them too through the far corner camera when one of them reached the bridge over the stream and fell. Fugitives from the city. Like in the first life. Like back then. And the memory immediately came. The crowd at the entrance to the subway. People who believed they would be safe underground. He had been among them then too. June clenched his teeth. Let them in? Hanbit asked. Everyone was looking at him. This was the first real moral choice. Letting people in was a risk. Not letting them in was condemning them. June was silent for several seconds. Then he said, first, a check. He went out himself, but did not open the gates. Only the inner airlock. Through the fence, 5 survivors could be seen. 2 men, 2 women, and a teenager. Their clothes were torn, their faces gray from exhaustion. One man held his hand to his ribs. Blood. Help. One of the women shouted. Please. June did not move. So Young was already standing beside him with a first aid kit. What are we going to do? She asked quietly. Check. Questions. First, where they are coming from. He turned on the external speaker. Name the district you came from. The people below looked at each other. Yongsan. One man shouted. We are from Yongsan. Where was the first center of panic? At the subway station. The woman shouted. Then everything went. People started running. June looked at them for another second. Then turned to Yu-sun. They are real. Yu-sun nodded. But that does not mean they are safe. June looked down again. We will open. But one at a time. And they hand over their weapons immediately. There were 5 of them. Kong Mi ran, 40 years old, accountant, calm, collected even in panic. Park Jong-woo, 43, delivery driver, leg wounded, but surprisingly patient. Ho Soo-min, 31, designer, nervous and very attentive. Lee Ji-hyun, 28, junior nurse, immediately appealed to So Young because she did not lose her head. Park Min-jae, 15 years old, a teenager, silent and pale, but with a very lively gaze. June led them through the airlock and left them in quarantine in a separate room of Building B. 2 hours, he said. Examination. Temperature. Wash the wounds. Then we will talk. Miran looked at him with distrust. You are not just a farm. June answered briefly. No? Then what are you? He looked at her calmly. A place where we intend not to die. She said nothing. But after that phrase, she clearly understood. Everything here was more serious than it might have seemed. When they passed the check, June gathered them in the common room. Now not as guests, but as possible future members of the shelter. Kong Mi Ran spoke first, because she had the character of a person used to speaking to the point. First there was darkness, she began. Then outages. Then people began to panic. Fights in stores immediately. Accidents on the roads. Communication was falling. We tried to get to the subway. Everyone said it was safer there. June remained silent. On the 3rd day it got worse in the city center. She continued. Dogs attacked people. Then someone saw large shadows on the bridges. Then people started disappearing. We left Yongsan on foot, stayed together as a group. Some of ours died. What happened to them? Hanbit asked. She looked at him with dead eyes. They were taken. Who? Pause. I do not know. But not people. The room became quiet. Lee Ji-hyun clenched her fingers. We were heading south, she said. Someone followed us for 2 days. At night, we heard something walking by the road. Not a dog, not a person. Yu-sun looked at Injun. That means everything began faster than we thought. Injun nodded. Because that was exactly how it had been in the first life. The first days were not yet the end, but only the beginning of the worst. After the survivors stayed in the shelter on a probationary period, Injun introduced new rules. Now there were not 5 people in the shelter, but 10. And this sharply changed everything. Rule 1. No secrets about external systems. Newcomers do not get access to cameras, generators, warehouses, and airlocks until there is full trust. Rule 2. Watch duties are doubled. Rule 3. Any new person undergoes a medical examination and psychological assessment. Rule 4. Protection is more important than comfort, but comfort is not canceled. Rule 5. If someone violates the regime, he puts everyone at risk. Kang Mi-ran accepted this calmly. Park Jong-woo grumbled, but did not argue. Ho Soo-min was nervous, but complied. Lee Ji-hyun helped So Young in the medical block almost immediately. Park Min-jae was silent for a long time, and then asked Injun, "Did you really build all this in advance?" "Yes." "Why?" Injun looked at him, then at the gray sky through the narrow upper opening. "Because I have already seen what will happen if this is not done." And Park Min-jae did not ask any more unnecessary questions. On the 7th night after the dimming, the real test came. The signal fishing line went off at 2:13. Yu-sun was the first to see movement on the external camera screen. In the southwest sector, he said sharply, "Fast." Several objects. Injun was already on his feet. Han Bit grabbed the rifle that was kept in the cabinet by the entrance. So Young ran to the medical block for the emergency kit. Sun Ho turned off the greenhouse light in emergency mode. The camera showed 5. No, not 5. At first it seemed they were wolves. But the proportions were wrong. 2 long front legs. 2 narrow heads. Their backs moved in waves, like animals that someone had broken and assembled again. Mutants, Injun said quietly. He had seen such ones in the first life, but not so early. Not this early. The creature in front jumped onto the fence. The alarm rang. On the other side, a second jump. To positions. Yu-sun shouted. And the first real defense of the shelter began. Injun acted quickly and without hesitation. The plan he and Yu-sun had developed in case of penetration worked almost perfectly. First stage, light. All external floodlights switched on at once, striking the mutants with bright white light. This did not kill them, but threw off their direction. Second stage, noise. Hanbit started 2 emergency sirens around the perimeter. The sharp sound made the creatures rush about for a second. Third stage, slowing. Under the fence, where metal spikes and pieces of rebar had been laid out in advance, one creature got caught and collapsed into the ditch. Fourth stage, fire. Sun Ho and Kang Mi-ran, who had previously worked in a warehouse and unexpectedly turned out to be very useful, threw down prepared torches soaked in diesel. The flame did not destroy the mutants, but forced them to retreat. One mutant still jumped over the outer fence. It ended up in the inner yard, and there it was met by Park Jong-woo. Not perfectly, not heroically, simply like a person who understood that it was already too late to run. He struck it in the snout with a metal pipe, knocking it off trajectory, and the creature fell directly under Han Bit's shot. The creature collapsed. Silence came so sharply that it could be felt on the skin. Injun stood by the inner door and breathed heavily. So Young approached first. "Is everyone alive?" "Yes." Yu-sun looked at the cameras. "But this is only reconnaissance." Injun nodded. Because he knew, if the mutants had come once, they would return. And now they had experience. For the next 3 days they worked without stopping. Injun strengthened the outer perimeter with another row of barbed rebar. Yu-sun reworked the alarm, adding motion sensors on cheap infrared sensors. Han Bit welded an additional inner shutter onto the airlock. Sun Ho accelerated the growth of the plants in the greenhouse by raising the lighting and temperature. So Young expanded the medical block. Kang Mi-ran took over the inventory of supplies. Park Jong-woo became Han Bit's assistant. Lee Ji-hyun became So Young's assistant. Park Min-jae, to everyone's surprise, turned out to be an excellent observer and received the task of keeping the camera log. Injun looked at them and understood. The shelter was ceasing to be just a fortress. It was becoming a society. And that meant now it had not only walls, but also responsibility. One morning, 10 days after the dimming, Yu-sun called Injun to the northern tower. Look, through the binoculars it was visible, something that had not been there yesterday. Tracks. Many tracks. Not mutants. People. June was silent until he saw one detail. The tracks went in an organized way, in one line, with intervals, like a group that was not running, but moving by order. Who is this? Hanbit asked, coming up after him. Yusun slowly lowered the binoculars. I do not know. June looked at the gray strip of road in the distance and felt a familiar, cold understanding rising in his chest again. The world had not simply collapsed. It had begun dividing into new rules. And if he wanted to survive, he would have to become not just the master of the shelter, but a person who would survive everything that came after. The organized group turned out to be neither a military convoy nor bandits. This became clear when they came closer. Dozens of figures appeared from the gray haze on the road. People with carts, bicycles, 2 small trucks, and several motorcycles whose headlights no longer worked, but whose engines did. They were not running, not sneaking. They walked evenly, with discipline, as if they knew the route in advance and were not going to turn off it. June stood on the northern tower and looked down. Yusun was the first to notice the detail. They have a flag. The camera zoomed in on the image. On one of the carts there really was a homemade sign fixed in place. A white circle on a dark background, inside which were 3 vertical lines. Who is that? So Young asked. Kongmi ran, who had already been helping with the supply inventory for the second day and listened carefully to everything concerning the outside world, turned pale. They are not looters, she said. I saw such signs in news groups even before all of this. And what does it mean? Hanbit asked. Cooperatives. Or communities. Those who prepared in advance and are now gathering survivors. June slowly looked at the road. They are not coming here by accident. He did not know whether this was good or bad. For now, it was simply a fact. The group stopped at shooting distance from the outer fence. A man of about 40 with a short haircut, in a thick dark jacket and protective glasses, stepped forward. He took a megaphone off his belt, looked at the walls, then upward, to where June was standing. We are looking for safe points for wintering. He shouted. Does anyone live here? June did not answer immediately. Yusun looked at him. If they are organized, they may be useful. Or dangerous, June answered. Yes, but useful too. June turned on the external speaker. Who are you? A community group from Suwon, the man answered. Our convoy is heading northeast. We are looking for autonomous sites with water sources and shelter. We need information and, possibly, a temporary agreement. June was silent, then asked, How many of you? 43 people right now. 5 wounded. 2 families with children. 1 medic. So Young turned sharply to him. 1 medic? Yes, the man answered. And we would like to talk. June looked at his people, then said, We do not open the gates. Conversation through the fence. The group was led by Cho Hyun-woo, a former logistics manager, if his words were to be believed, and, judging by his manner of speaking, a person used to making decisions in a crisis. He did not press, did not threaten, did not fuss. This was even more alarming. You have a fortified site, he said. Water, generator, greenhouse, cameras. That is visible even from the outside. You clearly prepared. June did not deny it. Yes. Then you understand that lone bases do not live long. But they live longer than wrong alliances, Yusun answered. Cho Hyun-woo looked at him with respect. Fair. But winter is already close. And outside it will soon become very bad. We have discipline, people, evacuation experience, connections with other groups. We can offer an exchange. Kongmi ran, standing beside So Young, whispered quietly. They want to take root. Yes, So Young answered just as quietly. And they know how to speak beautifully. Cho Hyun-woo continued. We are not offering a takeover. Only cooperation. You give us overnight shelter for part of the group, part of the supplies in exchange for route protection, medicine, and access to our craftsmen and people. We will help strengthen your perimeter. June looked at him for a long time. In the first life, perhaps, he would have agreed. There would have been no strength, not enough resources, loneliness would have pressed down, and living people would have seemed like salvation. Now everything was different. But that did not mean the offer was bad. It was simply dangerous. June did not say yes and did not say no. He offered a trial format. 24 hours. You do not enter the main complex. You remain in the outer zone. We will exchange some information and see who you really are. Cho Hyun-woo nodded at once. Reasonable. In the first hours, they exchanged only basic things. What is happening in the city? Which routes are safe? Where mutants have already appeared? What territories are occupied by other groups? From the conversation, a new map of the world emerged. Loners die quickly. Small groups do not survive without supplies. Nodes appear, autonomous points that become centers of a new order. Caravans, exchange and struggle for corridors are already going between them. And this was scarier than simple chaos, because chaos can be waited out. But a new order will come and demand submission. After part of the arriving group left, in June made the decision to truly expand the shelter. Not just strengthen the walls, make an outer circle of life. This was exactly what had been missing. Until now, the shelter had been compact, almost closed. But if winter would be long and external groups started being drawn to safe points, more space was needed, both for safety and for growth. In June's plan was this: inner center, building A, building B, bunker. Middle circle, greenhouse, fuel storage, medical block, workshop. Outer circle, security perimeter, observation points, reserve reception zone for people. This already resembled a small, autonomous settlement. Yu-sun immediately understood the meaning. You are building not just a fortress, he said. You are building a system that can be expanded. Yes, that is right. So Young looked at the drawing. But that means we need more people. In June nodded. Only not random ones. 3 days later, he went outside himself for the first time. Not far. Only to the old junction by the stream and back. Yu-sun, Park Min-jae, and Lee Ji-hyun went with him. Observation, communication, medicine in case of injuries. Hanbit stayed at the base, so Young too. In June walked along the road and felt how the world had changed. The light was gray and even, without shadows from the sun, without warmth. But the world still seemed strangely alive, and not in a good sense. Along the roadsides, traces of abandoned cars were already visible. Somewhere in the distance, a wrecked bus. On the asphalt, streaks of old blood, already almost black. Here, Park Min-jae said quietly. He pointed to an overturned motorcycle frame. We passed here a week ago. In June looked at the tracks. What is this? Yu-sun crouched down. Teeth. Not human. In June understood, mutants were now moving closer to roads, because there were fewer people, and the smell of food and smoke drew them toward survivor hubs. This meant one simple thing. The shelter could no longer be only hidden. It had to become active. On the way back, they found a man. Or rather, almost found him. Park Min-jae discovered him by the roadside, in a delivery service van half buried in snow. The man inside was alive, but exhausted, with frostbitten fingers and a high fever. When they pulled him out, he could barely speak. But he kept repeating the same thing. They are coming. Not people. Not people. So Young, when she saw him, instantly took over the medical side. Move him. Urgently. In June stood nearby and thought, let him in or not. Risk of infection. Risk of psychological instability. Risk that the man would bring a threat behind him. But he had already seen how people die alone, and did not want a repetition. Into quarantine, he said. For 3 days. Access only for So Young. Yu-sun nodded. Correct. This decision was important not only because of humanity. It meant that the shelter was beginning to turn into a point of attraction, and this could no longer be stopped. While So Young fought for the life of the found man, in June launched the second phase of reinforcement. Now they were building not just a system for defense, but seasonal autonomy. They insulated all entrance nodes and airlocks. 2. Added a second door to the medical block. 3. Ran additional cables to the greenhouse and bunker. 4. Expanded the dry ration storage. 5. Built a backup pellet stove in the bunker. 6. Installed internal metal blinds on all vulnerable windows. Sunho by that time had already brought the greenhouse to a stable mode. The first real vegetables were tiny, but real. Lettuce leaves, dill, spinach, a little radish. Not salvation, but a sign that life continued. So Young smiled when she saw the first crate. This is better than canned food for breakfast, she said. Much better? Hanbit asked. Do not ask stupid questions. Of course much better. The quarantine man woke up on the second day. His name was Kim Tae-suk. He had worked in logistics on the outskirts of Seoul. When the dimming began, he tried to evacuate his family. He lost his family. He himself survived by chance, hid in a truck, then walked on foot. In June listened to him in silence. Tae-suk spoke of the city as a place that had died faster than expected. First darkness, then electricity, then looters, then animals. Then people began trading each other for food and ammunition. Mutants? Yusun asked. Tae-suk slowly nodded. Saw one. On a bridge. Big. Too fast. Not human. So Young sat nearby and pretended that she was simply writing down symptoms. But in June saw, she had already decided that Tae-suk could be kept. And it was the right decision. Because a shelter, in order to live, had to become not only stronger, it had to become broader. After Tae-suk appeared, In June called everyone together for a general talk. We cannot remain just a group of survivors, he said. Too few resources, too many threats. Cho Hyun-woo and his people were still outside, in the daytime camp zone, and were waiting for a decision about long-term cooperation. Tae-suk was already inside, in quarantine, under So Young's control. The old residents of the shelter sat at the table opposite in June. Meaning? Kong Mi-ran asked. Meaning, we introduced the law of the shelter. Yu-sun smirked slightly. Sounds serious. Because it is. In June laid out sheets on the table. Law 1. The shelter accepts new people only after quarantine and inspection. Law 2. Everyone works. Whoever cannot physically helps with accounting, medicine, kitchen, security, greenhouse. Law 3. Supplies are distributed centrally. Law 4. A breach of security is a threat to everyone. Law 5. In June's decision may be challenged, but not during a crisis. Hanbit raised an eyebrow. Looks like a small state. In June did not smile. Exactly. So Young looked at him attentively. Are you ready for people to start relying on you? He looked back at her. No. Then why are you doing this? Because there is no one else. The snow came at the end of November. Not beautifully and not quietly. First as gray slush, then as fine icy pellets, and by morning everything around had become white and dead. Without the sun, the snow did not look festive, but almost painful, like bandages on a wound that no one intended to treat. In June stood by the camera on the northern tower and watched the road turn white. Yu-sun stood beside him and silently handed him a thermos. Warm tea, he said, while we can still afford it. In June took the thermos. How is the greenhouse? Alive. That had been the main word of the last weeks, alive. Not ideal, not strong, but alive. So Young had not left the medical block for the second day already. They had 2 wounded after a fall from a ladder while unloading fuel and 1 new survivor with inflamed lungs. Lee Ji-hyun helped her almost without sleep. Sun Ho saved the harvest as if he were fighting not for plants, but for meaning. Han Bit and Park Jong-woo were finishing the insulation of the outside pipes. The shelter had survived autumn. Now it had to survive winter. The first problems did not come from the cold. The first problems came from outside. Snow made the forest quieter. And in that silence, those who had previously hidden began to move. The alarm went off at night, at 3:17. Yu-sun was the first to look at the screen. Movement in the southeast sector. In June was already running down the corridor. On the cameras, several silhouettes could be seen slowly moving through the snow. Not people, not ordinary animals. Large, low, with long backs and disproportionately wide paws. Their fur seemed uneven, in places as if charred, in places whitish. Mutants, Hanbit said, pulling on his jacket. How many? So Young asked, already coming out with a first aid kit. Yu-sun zoomed in on the image. 4. No, 5. The 5th creature emerged from the shadow of the trees and almost blended into the snow. White ones, Park Min-jae said quietly. They are almost invisible. In June understood immediately. In winter they become more dangerous. Not just stronger, more concealed. They did not go for the fence. They went for the source of heat. Sun Ho saw it first. The greenhouse. He shouted over the internal communication. In June cursed and changed direction. The greenhouse was a weak point not because it was poorly built, but because there was always warmth and light there. For any predator, it was a target. Han Bit and Park Jong-woo were already on the way to the southern corridor. Yu-sun to the cameras. So Young stayed in the medical block with Tae-suk and the new wounded man. When In June reached the greenhouse, one of the creatures was already breaking the outer plastic layer. Light, he shouted. Sun Ho instantly turned the emergency floodlights to full mode. Bright white light struck the half-darkness of the greenhouse. The mutant froze. That gave Hanbit 1 second. Then 1 more second for a shot from the short carbine that in June kept in case of defense inside the complex. The creature collapsed into the snow. The others retreated, but did not leave. They waited. They learned from heat. Sunho whispered, pale but calm. They feel where life is. In June looked at the snow by the wall. Then the greenhouse needs to be protected as a separate fortress. It is already too late to pretend this is just a vegetable garden, Sun answered. And he was right. Winter changed everything, even inside the shelter. A new routine appeared, watching the windows, the ventilation, the condensation, making sure the water did not freeze through. Every degree, every liter of fuel, every kilowatt became important. In June introduced a daily heat schedule. Building A, temperature no lower than 18 degrees. Medical block, 22. Bunker, 16 minimum. Greenhouse, 24, and humidity under control. Night hours, reduction only in common rooms where people do not sleep. So Young insisted that everyone take vitamins and hot food twice a day. Cold does not strike only the body, she said. It strikes determination. If people start saving on food and sleep, they will begin making mistakes. Hanbit began grumbling because of the fuel consumption. We will burn through everything by January. Then we will do more sealing, and June answered. This is not magic. I know. That is why we work. And they worked, almost around the clock. In mid-December, when snow already lay in a dense layer, a signal came from the external camera. One person. In June approached the screen and saw a figure by the gates, a woman wrapped in several layers of clothing, with a small child on her back and empty hands. She did not shout. She only stood. Then she raised a sheet of paper to the camera. On it was written, "1 following." Alone. Sun looked at Injun. Could be a trap. Could be. And what? Injun was silent for several seconds. Then said, check as always. He went outside with Park Jong-woo and Sun, without opening the gates fully. The woman introduced herself as Jong-hae Ran. The child's name was Ji-woo. He was 3 years old. She had lost her husband in the first week. She was going to relatives, but was caught in an attack on the highway. She got here by following the traces of light from the greenhouse, which she saw at night over the hill. I am not asking for much, she said, barely staying on her feet. Only for the child to survive the winter. Injun looked at her. So Young came out after him. And it was she who said, we keep them. Injun nodded. Inside the shelter there became one more adult and one more child. And at once it became more difficult. And more right. Jong-hae Ran quickly got back on her feet and turned out to be useful. She worked in the kitchen, sewed warm clothes, helped watch the children, and once unexpectedly noticed a problem in the water supply system. If this hose stays open here, it will freeze overnight, she said, pointing to a section near the northern pipe. Injun looked and saw that she was right. You understand things like this. I worked in my husband's workshop. He did small repairs. I handled the organization. Sun immediately became interested. Can you help with insulating the pipes? Yes. Then you stay not only out of mercy, Injun said. You stay as part of the system. She nodded. That suits me. So Young later said to Injun quietly. Did you notice that we are no longer choosing between people and resources? Yes. And how do you feel about that? He looked out the window at the snow. Hard. But right? Yes. At the end of December, it was not mutants who came. People came. At first, on the camera screen, there were only lights in the distance. Then silhouettes on the road. Then it became clear that it was a group of no fewer than 20 people. They were moving on foot, with carts, some on bicycles. Organized. Not like random refugees. Cho Hyun-woo, the head of that first community group, made contact again. This time he came not alone, but with a delegation. We need a wintering point, he said through the fence. We have problems with fuel and water. We can offer people repairs and some medicines in exchange for overnight shelter and joint defense. Injun already understood where this was leading. If he let them in, the shelter would become a center. If he did not let them in, they could leave, but later return hostile. If he let them in partially, it was possible to keep control. Sun looked at him. Too many people. Yes. So Young stood nearby and remained silent. Then she said, but they will bring working hands. Hanbit snorted from behind. And problems. People always bring both, she answered. Injun looked at the delegation behind the fence for a long time. Then said, 2 days of quarantine. Outside. After that, a conversation about quotas and rules. Cho Hyun-woo nodded like a person who had expected exactly this. After the appearance of the new group, June understood. The shelter could no longer be just a private project. A structure was needed. He divided the territory into 3 sectors. Sector 1, the core. June and the main people, bunker, medical block, server room, key supplies. Sector 2, working zone. Greenhouse, workshops, kitchen, laundry, clothing warehouse. Sector 3, reception zone. External rooms for new people, quarantine, temporary living, separate entrance, separate guard. Cho Hyun-woo and his people, after quarantine, received a place in the outer sector. But not for free. Everyone had to work. Someone on carrying water. Someone on reinforcement. Someone in the kitchen. Someone on night security. One of his people, a woman named Lee Soo-ae, turned out to be an experienced electrician and immediately took on reworking the distribution panel. "Everything here is held together with spit and prayers," she said after inspecting the system. Hanbit was offended. "With good spit and prayers. Then with very good ones," she answered without a smile. June did not interfere. He was busy with the main task, making the system withstand not only winter, but people too. In January, when the frost intensified, Yu-sun caught a weak radio transmission signal. Very weak, but real. He put the sound on the common communication. "If anyone can hear. Corridor to the east. Infected. Do not go. I repeat. Static. Then again, state reserve node. Guanic. Did not hold. And then crackling." June froze. "Reserve node?" Yu-sun looked at him. "It looks like there are still organized points in the city, but they are falling." This was bad and useful at the same time. Bad because the world continued to collapse. Useful because they were getting a map of where not to go, and possibly where they could go in the future. So Young listened silently, then said quietly, "So we are not alone." June answered, "Yes. And that means we must be stronger." And finally the moment came that June had been waiting for and fearing. They needed real resources. Not only supplies. Not only survivors. They needed medicines, fuel, tools, industrial rubber, batteries, cables, generator units, everything that could not be produced endlessly inside. So he chose 3. Hanbit as technician and welder. Yu-sun as security and tactics. So Young as medic and assessment of medicine suitability. And himself as leader. 3 old members of the shelter remained in charge. Cho Hyun-woo, Lee Soo-ae, and Sun Ho. Kangmi Ran took inventory control. Before leaving, So Young looked at June. "If something goes wrong, we will return." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." She nodded, and they went out through the gates. For the first time, not as fugitives. As people who were going to get what they needed so that their world would not die completely. Seoul was not dead. It was worse. A dead city can be survived. In a dead city, it is quiet, empty, and the danger is at least honest. But Seoul after the dimming looked as if it had simply been stopped in the middle of movement. Cars stood across streets. Shop windows were smashed. Snow lay on bus stops over old traces of blood, and above all of it hung a gray sky without the sun. June walked first. Behind him Yu-sun, Hanbit, and So Young. They had a truck without unnecessary markings, filled to the top, with chains on the wheels, a reserve of fuel, and a route that June had drawn up even before the start of winter from memory and maps. The goal was simple and insane at the same time. Take everything that could keep the shelter alive for another year. First a pharmacy, then an electronics warehouse, then a construction hypermarket, he said. And all of that on one route. Hanbit asked. Almost. Almost is the favorite word of people who want to die beautifully, Yu-sun muttered. June did not smile, because he was focused on something else, on the fact that the city no longer belonged to people. In the first life, he would have taken the main road. Not now. He remembered how panic there killed faster than monsters. So they moved through narrow streets, courtyards, unloaded alleys, and sections with collapsed traffic. Hanbit sat behind the wheel, Yu-sun in the passenger seat with a map, So Young and June in the back, beside the crates and weapons. Barricade ahead, Yu-sun said. June looked out the window. Yes, barricade. Not government-made, homemade. Car bodies, bags, pieces of concrete. Someone had already tried to close the street and failed to hold it. We go around, he said. They turned into a side passage and immediately heard a sound. Not a scream, not a shot. A light, strange scratching against metal. Yu-sun raised his hand. Stop. From under an overturned minivan, a creature slowly crawled out. A dog. or once a dog. The fur on its back had grown into hard, pale needles. The muzzle had become too long, the eyes almost white. But worst of all was that it did not rush immediately. It watched. June froze for a fraction of a second, then fired first. The creature jerked and fell into the snow. "There is the first encounter," So Young said quietly. "Yes," June answered. And it was reconnaissance. The pharmacy in the center of the district had been looted, but not completely. June entered it with Yusun, while Han Bit held the street, and So Young inspected the neighboring rooms. Inside, the smell was heavy: medicinal powders, mold, stale air, blood. Some shelves were collapsed, some empty, but in the back storage there were still things left. So Young literally came alive. "This is all still usable." She quickly sorted through the boxes, checked expiration dates, sorted by categories: antibiotics, fever reducers, insulin, syringes, dressings, disinfection, burn treatment, strong painkillers. June followed behind and loaded boxes into the cart. "How much can we take?" Yusun asked. "Everything," June answered, "but with priority." So Young raised her head. "We already have a reserve." "A reserve for the shelter," he answered. "This is for people we do not know yet." She understood, and silently nodded. When they were leaving, June noticed a supply map in the depths of the warehouse. On it, someone had circled several points with a red marker. One of them was called Guanic Reserve. He took the map, and it became the second target of the raid. Guanic Reserve turned out not to be a warehouse in the usual sense. It was a private logistics hub under an old shopping complex on the outskirts of the district. A semi-underground floor, once used for storing household appliances, was now locked with emergency locks. But it was not that simple. The door had already been broken open by someone before them. "Someone was here before," Han Bit said. "Yes," June answered. "And possibly not all of them came back." Inside it was cold and dark, but there were things they're worth risking for. Batteries, industrial batteries, solar controllers, rolls of cable, generator spare parts, and most importantly, several unopened containers with diesel fuel for portable equipment. Yusun whistled. "This will last us for months." "With reasonable consumption," June clarified. "You always add with reasonable consumption, as if that is even possible." "It is possible, if you want to live." While they were loading the containers, So Young suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" Silence. Then a sound from above. Not footsteps. A blow. June raised his head. Everyone back. The next blow was stronger. Something large was on the upper level of the complex and seemed to sense their heat. The mutant appeared from above through a breach in the floor of the technical corridor. It was larger than the ones they had seen near the shelter. Long legs, rough skin, growths instead of ears. Its fur was covered in places with snow, in places with something dark and hard, like bark. Han Bit jumped back. "Damn!" Yusun immediately raised his weapon. The creature did not rush. It assessed, and that was the worst part. June understood that before him was not just a beast, but a predator that had already encountered people and survived. "Do not let it near the batteries," he shouted. So Young quickly led herself and Han Bit into a side passage. Yusun took the corner. June stepped forward, understanding that if the creature reached the supplies, they would lose the most important thing. Shot. The creature jerked, but did not fall. Another shot. It lunged to the side and hit a rack, knocking down boxes. "Left," Yusun shouted. June rushed forward, grabbed a metal pipe, and struck the joint of its hind leg. The creature howled and darted toward the exit. But at that moment Han Bit, who had already lifted a heavy metal beam from the floor, brought it down from above. With a dull blow, the mutant collapsed. Silence. The three of them exhaled almost at the same time. So Young, standing by the wall, said very quietly, "If they are already in underground warehouses, that means the city is not governed only by the cold." June silently looked at the dark breach. He knew she was right. On the way back they found tracks. Not mutants. People. And that was even worse. Flags stood on the roof of the shopping complex. Unofficial. Homemade. But identical. A black background, a white line, and a small triangle above. Yusun raised the binoculars. "Someone lives there." June looked closer. There were not just people on the roof. There were tents, windbreaks, heat screens, observation points. An organized shelter. Someone else's. "They are not looters," Han Bit said quietly. "No," June answered. "This is a hub." So Young frowned. Like ours? Looks like it. June looked at the roofs and thought, perhaps this was even good. It meant there were other strong points in the city. But it also meant something else. They were not the only ones building order. And that always ends badly if people do not agree in time. They did not try to get inside right away. June gave a signal with a white cloth on a long stick, an old way to show peaceful intentions. 10 minutes later, a man with a rifle and a flashlight came down from the roof. Young, thin, but with a very calm face. Who are you? He asked. Survivors from Yangpyeong-gun, June answered. Looking for resources. Without conflict. The guy looked at them for several seconds, then said, wait. He went back upstairs. After some time they saw two more, and then a woman of about 35 in a thick jacket, who was clearly the main commander here. She introduced herself, Lee Ji-young, leader of this point. June nodded. Cha June, I know who you are. We saw your caravan in winter. Some people from your group passed through the southern routes. June tensed. And we did not attack. So for now we have no problems. She looked straight at him. You have a generator, a greenhouse, and a medic. We have a power grid, a partial solar farm, and an industrial warehouse. Are the conditions clear? June was silent, then asked, do you want an alliance? I want exchange and security. Alliance later. Yu Sun said quietly. This is already politics. Lee Ji-young heard and nodded. Exactly. The world has ended. Now the politics of survival begins. They returned to the shelter with the truck packed to the limit. Accumulators, batteries, cable, fuel canisters, medicines, 2 solar panels removed from the roof of the warehouse, a box of tools, several packs of industrial filters for ventilation. When the gates opened, everyone inside the shelter exhaled almost in sync. Kongmi ran counted everything they had brought. Sun Ho rejoiced like a child when he saw new elements for the light system. So Young immediately took up the medicines. Cho Hyun-woo listened carefully to the story about the other point and for the first time looked not like a negotiator, but like a person who understood the scale of the world. June stood in the middle of the yard and thought about the most important thing. They had found not just things. They had found a model of the future. Other shelters, networks, exchange, politics, conflict of interests. So the world had not died completely. It had changed. That night, June gathered the team. Now this was no longer just a group of survivors. He had more than 20 people, some of whom lived inside, some in the outer sector, some worked in shifts. And all of them needed a plan. We are no longer just holding on, he said. We are becoming a hub. Yu Sun nodded. If there are other hubs, we need to build connections. So Young added. But connections mean the risk of infection, conflicts, and dependence. Yes, June said. Therefore connections will only be through rules. Cho Hyun-woo folded his arms. Trade agreements? And quarantine. And exchange according to lists. And access control. Lee Sue snorted. You are building a state. June looked at her calmly. No. For now. Only a shelter. But if the world needs order, then we will be part of it. Sun Ho, who usually spoke only about plants, unexpectedly added. And do not forget about food. States often forget that people need to be fed. For the first time in a long while, everyone laughed quietly. And then it became serious again. Because somewhere outside, beyond the snow and darkness, this new world had already begun gathering its laws. And June understood that the next stage would be even more dangerous. Not just to survive, but to hold everything that they had already managed to build.